palace of Verdenia Prime was hushed as a tomb when Empress Lyra departed that morning. Her daughters stood in a line, resembling delicate porcelain figures in their formal attire. She had entrusted a single directive to the human attendant: maintain their quietude. Keep them immobile. Keep them flawless. However, upon her return 3 hours later, the sound that reached her ears defied every decree she had ever established. It was laughter. Wild, unbridled, joyous laughter that reverberated through the courtyard like a clandestine melody. She halted in the entryway, her breath catching as she observed a scenario she had meticulously worked for years to prevent. Her daughters were engaged in play, and the human responsible for them stood amidst their merriment, a smile gracing his lips as if he had stumbled upon the most natural occurrence in existence. Before we proceed, if narratives of this nature resonate with you, kindly subscribe to ensure you don't miss subsequent installments. Furthermore, should these extended narratives offer solace or inspiration, please consider contributing a small token of your appreciation via Buy Me a Coffee. Even a single unit of currency can significantly aid in my ongoing studies, work, and continued creation of these tales for your enjoyment. My deepest gratitude, offered with heartfelt affection. The Verdenia Prime's imperial palace was not designed for the innocence of youth. It was conceived for the assertion of authority. Every surface shimmered with an unyielding perfection. Metallic finishes that offered no warmth. Crystalline walls that absorbed no sound. Floors so polished they might as well have been ice. The architectural design, while organically shaped, lacked any semblance of spirit. All curves and arches were intended to inspire awe, never to provide comfort. Even the illumination felt deliberately managed, filtered through tinted panels that cast a pale green luminescence upon everything, creating the impression that the entire palace was submerged beneath water. This was the sole environment the 5 daughters of Empress Lyra had ever known. They had never run. They had never raised their voices. They had never engaged in play. Their names were Sela, Niara, Vin, Kayela, and little Iris, the youngest, only 4 solar cycles old. Their ages spanned from 4 to 9 years. Each one was a perfect replication of their mother. Their skin was green, their hair short and emerald, their ears pointed, and their eyes held a depth of intelligence far exceeding human comprehension. They represented royalty. They embodied legacy. They were the symbols of an empire that spanned 3 star systems, and they were profoundly, achingly alone. Their daily regimen remained unchanging. They would awaken at dawn, don formal gowns that restricted their movement, participate in 4 hours of educational programming transmitted directly to neural implants situated behind their ears, consume meals in silence, practice diplomatic posture, study 7 languages, and under no circumstances were they to laugh, cry, or behave as children. Empress Lyra believed this discipline constituted love. She was convinced she was preparing them for survival in a universe that preyed upon weakness. She had ascended to the throne through a path paved with betrayal, warfare, and personal loss, and she was determined to shield her daughters from the very vulnerabilities she herself had once experienced. Emotion was perceived as weakness. Gentleness was equated with danger. Joy was an indulgence no sovereign could afford. Consequently, when she announced that morning her attendance at an emergency convocation of the Galactic Council, an assembly expected to last no less than 3 hours, she left behind a set of directives as unyielding as tempered steel. "They are not to depart the study chamber," she instructed the human custodian, her voice devoid of warmth and precise. "They are not to remove their gowns. They are not to speak unless responding to an educational inquiry. They are not to touch anything. Do you comprehend?" The human custodian nodded. His name was David Cole, and he had been employed within the palace for 6 months. He was a solitary father from Earth, a planet that had only recently been granted provisional status within the Galactic Coalition. He had journeyed to Verdenia Prime out of sheer necessity. His wife had passed away 2 years prior, and he required employment that would allow him to remit funds back home to his aging parents, who were raising his own daughter in his absence. Janitorial work in an extraterrestrial palace was one of the few occupations that did not demand advanced academic qualifications or species-specific biological compatibility. The remuneration was modest, but the position offered stability. And David had long ago learned that stability held greater importance than personal pride. He was tall for a human, broad-shouldered, with dark hair beginning to show streaks of gray at his temples. His work overalls were a faded blue, his hands calloused, and his expression typically impassive. The Verdinian staff paid him little mind. He was mere background, invisible. Yet the daughters did notice him. They always had, because David possessed a quality that no one else in the palace exhibited. He offered them a smile, not the sharp, professional veneer of a diplomat, not the curt acknowledgement of a servant, a genuine smile, warm, gentle, the kind that conveyed, "I see you. I recognize you as more than a title." And today, as Empress Lyra's vessel ascended into the heavens, David stood alone in the study chamber with 5 young girls who had never been permitted to simply be young girls. Sailor, the eldest at 9 years old, sat perfectly erect in her chair, her hands clasped in her lap. Her gown was a deep violet, adorned with silver embroidery. She gazed directly ahead, her expression vacant. Niara, 8 years old, sat beside her, equally motionless. Her gown was indigo. She blinked only when absolutely necessary. Vin and Kyla, the twins at 6 years of age, mirrored each other's posture precisely. Their gowns were in matching shades of teal. They did not fidget. They did not whisper. And little Iris, 4 solar cycles old, occupied the smallest chair, her tiny green hands clenched around the armrests as if fearful she might fall. Her gown was a pale lavender, far too long for her, pooling around her feet. The silence in the room was oppressive. David moved slowly around the perimeter, attending to the lighting panels as part of his routine duties, but his gaze repeatedly drifted towards the children. They resembled dolls, exquisite, delicate, lifeless. He thought of his own daughter, Emma, back on Earth. She was 7 now. He had not seen her in 4 months. During their last video call, she had shown him a drawing she had created, a crayon sketch depicting the 2 of them holding hands beneath a cerulean sky. She had been laughing, her cheeks smudged with paint, her hair disheveled. She had been vibrant. These girls, they appeared to be holding their breath. David stopped in front of little Iris. She did not look up at him, but her fingers twitched subtly on the armrest. He crouched down, bringing himself to her eye level. "Hey," he said softly. Iris's eyes flickered towards him for a mere second before returning to the wall. "Are you tired of sitting?" he inquired. She offered no response, but her fingers twitched again. David glanced at the others. Chella's jaw tightened. Niara's eyes widened infinitesimally. The twins remained unmoving. He made a decision. "Your mother instructed you to remain in this room," David stated slowly. "She did not mandate that you stay in those chairs." Iris's eyes snapped to his face. "And she didn't say." David's lips curved into a faint, almost mischievous smile that seemed impossible to suppress. For a protracted moment, no one inhaled. And then, Iris's small green hand slowly, deliberately, slipped from the armrest. Sella sprang to her feet, her composure faltering. "No, we cannot." But Iris was already standing, her bare green feet making contact with the cool floor. She gazed up at David with wide eyes, as if she had just committed an act of profound rebellion. David extended his hand. "Do you want to see something?" Iris stared at his hand as if it were a gateway to another dimension. Then, with the cautious deliberation of someone diffusing a volatile device, she placed her tiny fingers into his palm. David rose, gently drawing her along. "Come, all of you." "Absolutely not," Sailor declared, but a tremor underscored her voice. David turned back to her. "Your mother assigned me a singular task today, to watch you. That is precisely what I am doing. I am observing you. And what I am observing is 5 children who have forgotten how to simply be children." "We are not children," Sailor asserted sharply. "We are the imperial lineage of Verdania Prime." "You are 9 years old," David replied quietly. "You are a child." The words hung in the air like an admission of guilt. Chella opened her mouth, then closed it. Her hands trembled at her sides. David led Iris towards the doorway that opened onto the courtyard. The other girls remained frozen in their chairs, their gazes fixed on them as if witnessing someone stepping off a precipice. "David," Niara whispered. "Please." If Mother discovers this, she won't, David interrupted. He looked back at them, his expression now serious. Because nothing detrimental is going to occur. I give you my word. The twins exchanged a look. Vin's fingers tapped rhythmically against her knee. Kayla's lips parted slightly as if she wished to speak but had forgotten how. And then Iris did something that shattered their remaining resistance. She giggled. It was faint, barely audible, yet it echoed in that silent study chamber like a peal of thunder. Niara's breath hitched. The twins gasped. Sailor's eyes widened. David smiled. See? The universe did not implode. He opened the door to the courtyard. The air outside was warmer, gentler, carrying the subtle fragrance of the floral species cultivated in the palace gardens. The ground was covered in a peculiar blue synthetic turf, yielding and soft. The courtyard was deserted. No guards, no attendants, simply open space. Iris stepped out and gazed up at the sky. She had observed it before, of course, through windows, but she had never stood beneath it. It's enormous, she whispered. David chuckled. Yes, it is. One by one, the others followed. Niara came first, moving with an ethereal grace, then the twins, hand in hand, and finally Sailor, her jaw set, her eyes blazing with a mixture of terror and defiance. They stood in a compact cluster, hesitant, as if the sheer openness of the space might engulf them entirely. David walked to the center of the courtyard, then turned to face them. Do you know what this place needs? They regarded him expectantly. He grinned. A game. And it was at that moment that everything shifted. Iris did not immediately stand when they first assembled in the courtyard. She remained stationary, her small form rigid, as if the very atmosphere might report her to her mother. David observed them. 5 royal daughters standing in an open courtyard like prisoners catching their first glimpse of sunlight. They possessed no understanding of how to embrace freedom. They did not even recognize its appearance. All right, David said, rubbing his hands together. The first order of business is to get you out of those gowns. Chella's head snapped towards him, her eyes flashing. Absolutely not. Relax, David said, holding up his hands. I'm not suggesting you remove them. I'm suggesting you need something to wear underneath. You must have something you can move in, right? Pajamas? Exercise attire? The girls exchanged glances. We possess sleep garments, Niara stated slowly, but we are not permitted to wear them outside of our sleeping chambers. Your mother isn't here, David pointed out, and those dresses will impede you if you attempt to run. We do not run, Sella replied flatly. David raised an eyebrow. Ever? Running is considered undignified. David exhaled slowly, shaking his head. My word, your mother truly left her mark on you, didn't she? Jella's jaw tightened. Our mother is safeguarding us from what? From weakness. David regarded her for a prolonged moment, a softness entering his expression. Child, experiencing happiness is not weakness. Playing is not weakness. If anything, it requires courage to allow yourself to be joyful when the world constantly urges you not to. Sailor remained silent, but her hands clenched into fists. David sighed. Listen, I'll propose a compromise. Go change into something you can move in. If you find you dislike it, we will cease. But if you do not, perhaps you will discover that your mother was mistaken about at least one thing. The girls exchanged uncertain glances. Finally, little Iris tugged at David's overalls. I wish to try. That was all it took. 10 minutes later, they reappeared in the courtyard, clad in matching pink pajamas, soft, unadorned, adorned with tiny star patterns. Their feet were bare. Their hair was slightly mussed. For the first time, they appeared as children. David smiled. Much improved? Jella crossed her arms, her expression still wary. And now what? David walked towards a storage unit situated near the courtyard's edge, a place where maintenance equipment was kept. He rummaged through it for a moment, then produced an object that caused the girls to tilt their heads in confusion. A black and white soccer ball. What is that? Vin inquired. It's a ball, David explained, bouncing it once on the turf. We use it to play a game on my homeworld. It's called soccer or football. depending on your preference. What is its purpose? Kayla asked. David grinned. Amusement. They stared at him blankly. He laughed. All right. The objective is to propel the ball into that. He gestured towards a small, child-sized goal he had erected at the far end of the courtyard. You are not permitted to use your hands, only your feet. The first individual to score wins. Wins what? Niara inquired. Bragging rights, David replied, and the knowledge that you are superior at soccer to your sisters. The twins perked up at this. Sailor frowned. This is a competition. Somewhat, David acknowledged, but primarily, it is simply for enjoyment. You run around, you endeavor to retrieve the ball, you laugh when someone stumbles. It is not about achieving perfection. It is about the act of playing. We do not know how to play, Sailor stated softly, and for the first time, a note of vulnerability entered her voice. David's expression softened. Then I shall instruct you. He placed the ball in the center of the courtyard and stepped back. All right, Iris, you go first. Simply attempt to kick it towards the goal. Iris approached the ball as if it might detonate. She lifted one small green foot, then nudged the ball with her toes. It rolled approximately 2 inches. David clapped. Excellent. See? You are a natural. Iris beamed. Now try again, David encouraged. But this time, truly kick it. Do not be apprehensive. You cannot damage it. Iris bit her lip, then swung her leg and kicked the ball with all her might. It shot forward, bouncing erratically across the turf. She gasped, then began to run after it, her bare feet slapping against the ground. And then she laughed. Not a quiet, polite chuckle, but a loud, breathless, joyous peal that erupted from her chest as if she had been suppressing it her entire life. The sound brought everyone to a standstill. Niara's eyes welled with tears. The twins stared, wide-eyed. Kella's breath hitched. David smiled. That's it, Iris. Go get it. Iris chased the ball across the courtyard, stumbling, laughing, her short green hair bouncing with every stride. When she finally caught up to it, she kicked it again, and it rolled past the goal. Goal! David exclaimed, raising his arms. I scored! Iris spun around, her face radiant. I did it. You certainly did, David affirmed, grinning. Now, who's next? The twins exchanged a look. Then without a word, they both sprinted towards the ball. What followed was pandemonium. Vin reached it first and kicked it towards her sister. Kayla kicked it back. They began passing it between themselves, their laughter mingling with their movements, their actions clumsy, yet authentic. Niara joined in, initially tentative, then with increasing speed and boldness. Soon, all 4 younger girls were running, chasing, shouting, their voices filling the courtyard with a sound it had never before known. Sailor remained at the periphery, observing, her arms still crossed. David approached her. Are you going to join in? No, she replied stiffly. Why not? Because I am the eldest. I bear the responsibility. David nodded. You are also 9 years old. Kella looked away. That is irrelevant. It should not be, David stated quietly. You know, back on Earth, I have a daughter around your age, Emma, and sometimes she tries to act as if she's 30 because she believes that's what I require from her. But do you know what I tell her? Kella remained silent. I tell her that I need her to be 7 because that is who she is, and that is sufficient. Kella's jaw trembled. If I am not responsible, who will protect them? David looked at the girls running across the courtyard, their laughter echoing off the palace walls. Child, they do not require protection at this moment. They require their elder sister to play with them. Kella's eyes glistened. I do not know how. David smiled gently. Then learn. He extended his hand. Kella stared at it for a long moment. Then slowly she uncrossed her arms and placed her hand in his. David led her onto the field. All right, here's the trick. You run, you kick, and you do not overthink it. Just move. I have never simply moved in my life, Kella confessed, but a faint hint of a smile graced her lips. There's a first time for everything, David responded. Then he kicked the ball towards her. Go. Kella hesitated. Then she ran. And for the first time in her existence, Empress Lyra's eldest daughter played. They played for an hour. Initially, their attempts were awkward. Stumbling feet, uncertain kicks, confused collisions. But children are quick learners when joy serves as their instructor. Within minutes, the courtyard had transformed into something unrecognizable. The Imperial Daughters of Verdania Prime were running. They were laughing. They were alive. David stood near the goal, offering guidance with the patience of someone who had spent years helping a child navigate scraped knees in initial attempts. When Vin stumbled, he helped her up. When Kayla scored, he cheered. When Niara inadvertently kicked the ball against the palace wall, he demonstrated a different foot angle. And when Shella, the serious, responsible, burdened Shella, finally scored her inaugural goal, she did not merely smile. She let out a triumphant scream, a full-throated cry that reverberated across the courtyard like a battle cry. Then she froze, her hands flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with consternation. David laughed. "That's it. Let it out." I should not have," Chella stammered, but her sisters were already converging around her, jumping with exhilaration, drawing her back into the game. For the first time in her life, Chella forgot to be afraid. David watched them, a tightness in his chest he couldn't quite define. It wasn't precisely pride. It was something deeper, something that reminded him why he had chosen to become a father in the first place. Because children were not meant to be confined. They were meant to be free. However, freedom, as it transpired, carried a consequence, and that consequence was imminent. Empress Lyra's transport descended towards the palace precisely 3 hours after her departure, right on schedule. The Galactic Council session had been taxing, but essential. A trade dispute between two minor colonies necessitating diplomatic intervention. She had resolved it with her characteristic efficiency, her pronouncements sharp and definitive. Now, she craved silence. She desired order. She wished to return to a palace where everything remained precisely as she had left it. The transport landed on the upper platform, and Lyra disembarked, her long crimson gown trailing behind her like a cascade of liquid fire. She was tall, elegant, her green skin luminous in the afternoon light. The diadem adorning her head was delicate yet unmistakable, 3 intertwined silver bands signifying her sovereign status. She proceeded through the palace corridors with deliberate purpose, her footsteps making no sound on the polished floors. The staff bowed as she passed. No one spoke. No one dared. She reached the study chamber and opened the door. It was vacant. Lyra's eyes narrowed. She stepped inside, surveying the room. The chairs were empty. The educational interface was deactivated. The gowns her daughters had been wearing were neatly folded on a side table. Her daughters were gone. A frigid knot of indignation tightened in her chest. She turned abruptly and moved towards the courtyard entrance, her mind already calculating potential penalties. The human custodian had a singular duty, a straightforward instruction, and he had failed. She would have him removed from the palace, possibly deported back to his rudimentary planet. But as she approached the courtyard door, she heard something that made her pause mid-stride. Laughter. Lyra's hand froze on the door panel. It was unmistakable. High-pitched, breathless, unrestrained. The sound of children playing. Her children, her daughters, who had never been permitted to emit such sounds. Slowly, cautiously, she opened the door just enough to peer through, and what she beheld fractured something within her. The courtyard was a vibrant tableau of motion and color. 5 small figures in pink pajamas were darting across the blue turf, pursuing a black and white ball with uninhibited abandon. Their hair was disheveled. Their feet were bare. Their faces were flushed green with exertion. And they were laughing. Iris, the youngest, was racing towards the goal, her tiny legs propelling her with all their might. Vin and Kayla ran close behind, cheering her on with encouraging shouts. Niara lagged a bit, but she was smiling regardless, her arms outstretched as though she could grasp the very air. And Chella, her eldest, her serious, perfectly composed Chella, was at the heart of it all. Her face was alight with a smile so radiant it seemed it might split her features. At the epicenter of the joyous commotion stood the human caretaker. He wasn't directing them. He wasn't issuing orders. He was simply present, offering applause for each goal, chuckling when someone stumbled, moving in rhythm with them, a part of their world as if he naturally belonged, as if they were his own. Lyra's breath hitched in her chest. For 9 years, she had meticulously constructed barriers around her daughters. 9 years instilling in them the belief that emotions were a frailty, that happiness was perilous, that affection was a luxury they could ill afford. And in a mere 3 hours, this man had dismantled it all. She ought to have been enraged. She should have stormed into the courtyard and brought this to an immediate halt. Yet she found herself immobilized. For the first time in 9 years, she was witnessing her daughters as they were truly meant to be, vibrant and alive. David was the first to spot her. His gaze drifted towards the palace entrance, and there, silhouetted against the interplay of shadow and light, stood a figure. A knot of apprehension tightened in his stomach. Empress Lyra. The girls remained oblivious. They were still immersed in their game, their laughter still echoing, lost in a realm where regulations held no sway. David straightened with deliberate slowness, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm. He had anticipated this confrontation. He had known repercussions were inevitable. But seeing Iris score another point, witnessing Shella embrace her younger sister in shared triumph, observing 5 children simply being children for the first time in their lives, it had been worth every risk. Lyra emerged from the shadowed doorway and stepped into the open courtyard. The cheerful sounds ceased abruptly. The girls froze, their eyes wide, their bodies stiffening as if an unseen switch had been thrown. Iris let the ball drop. Sella's radiant smile vanished. The twins instinctively clasped each other's hands. They appeared as though they had been caught in the act of some grave transgression. David moved forward, positioning himself between the Empress and her daughters. "Your Majesty," he began. "I can explain." Lyra raised a hand, silencing him. She advanced slowly across the courtyard, her gaze fixed not on David, but on her daughters. They now stood in a rigid line, trembling, awaiting her decree. Lyra halted before Sella. The eldest daughter looked up at her mother, her eyes brimming with tears. "Mother, we did not intend any harm." Lyra extended her hand. Sella flinched, but Lyra did not strike her. Instead, with a gentle, deliberate motion, she brushed a lock of her daughter's green hair from her face. Then, in a voice so hushed it was barely audible, she spoke. "When was the last time you heard yourself laugh?" Jella gazed up at her mother, her lips parted slightly, rendering her speechless. The question hung in the air, a delicate, perilous thread suspending a blade, beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Jella's voice finally broke. I do not recall, Mother." Lyra's hand remained on her daughter's cheek, her thumb tracing a soft path across the green skin. Her expression was inscrutable, neither conveying anger nor tenderness, but existing somewhere in the ambiguous space between, as if she were perceiving something for the very first time and struggling to comprehend its meaning. Behind Sella, the other girls remained motionless. Iris wept silently, tears tracing paths down her face. Niara's hands were clasped before her chest, as if in supplication. The twins had not moved since their mother's arrival. David stood his ground, several paces back, prepared to face any retribution. He had defied the established order. He had disregarded a direct command from the Empress. In any structured society, this would inevitably lead to consequences. Yet, he found himself unable to regret his actions. Not when he had witnessed the transformative effect those 3 hours had had on these children. Lyra finally shifted her gaze from Chella and directed her attention to David. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, the unmistakable gaze of someone who had governed an empire through intellect and unyielding resolve. "You were given explicit instructions," she stated, her voice devoid of warmth and perfectly controlled. "Yes, Your Majesty," David affirmed. "You disobeyed them." "Yes, Your Majesty." "You removed my daughters from their study chamber." "Yes, Your Majesty." "You allowed them to change out of their formal attire." "Yes, Your Majesty." "You permitted them to engage in unsupervised physical activity." David nodded. "I did." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "Why?" The question was not merely rhetorical. She genuinely sought an understanding. David drew a breath. "Because they are children, Your Majesty, and children need to play." "They are not simply children," Lyra countered sharply. "They are the imperial lineage, They embody the future of Venia Prime. Every moment of their existence must be dedicated to preparing them for the immense responsibility of leadership. There is no allowance for levity. No room for joy, David interjected softly. Lyra's jaw tightened. Joy is a distraction. Joy is essential, David asserted. He knew he was testing the limits of her patience. He understood he was likely moments away from being escorted from the palace by security. However, an inner conviction compelled him to stand his ground. Your Majesty, I have been employed here for 6 months, and each day I have observed your daughters in silent study. I have watched them master languages, analyze celestial charts, and perfect diplomatic protocols, and they excel at it. Truly, they are brilliant. But, he paused, carefully selecting his next words, they do not smile. They do not laugh. They speak only when addressed. And I repeatedly pondered, what is the purpose of preparing them to govern an empire if they have forgotten what it feels like to be truly alive? Lyra remained silent. Her expression was still impassive, yet a subtle flicker appeared in her eyes, a hint of something ancient and deeply buried. David pressed on. I have a daughter back on Earth, named Emma. She is 7 years old. And when my wife passed away, I believe the most beneficial course for Emma was to teach her resilience, to make her tough, to never exhibit vulnerability. But do you know what I discovered? He gestured towards the 5 girls standing behind Lyra, their faces pale and etched with apprehension. I learned that strength devoid of joy is merely endurance, and endurance is not the same as living. The courtyard fell into a profound silence. The stillness was such that David could distinctly hear the beat of his own heart. Lyra regarded him for a lengthy moment. Then she turned her attention back to her daughters. Sela, she said, her voice regaining a softer tone. Come here. Chella approached slowly, her movements measured, her body taut with apprehension. Lyra knelt, bringing herself to her eldest daughter's eye level. It was a gesture so startlingly unexpected that even David felt his breath catch. Empresses did not kneel, but mothers did. Tell me the truth, Lyra said quietly. Were you happy today? Chella's eyes widened. Mother, truly, Sela. Chella's lips quivered, tears streamed down her cheeks, and in a voice barely above a whisper she confessed, yes. Lyra closed her eyes. For a brief instant she appeared as though she might shatter. Then she opened her eyes and looked at each of her daughters in turn. All of you, were you happy? One by one they nodded. Iris nodded so vigorously that her entire body trembled. Lyra rose slowly, her gaze distant, as if she were observing something far beyond the confines of the courtyard. When she spoke again, her voice was noticeably softer, almost fragile. I ascended to the role of empress at the age of 16, she recounted. My mother was assassinated during treaty negotiations. I witnessed her demise, and in that moment, I learned that the universe is indifferent to innocence. It disregards childhood. It takes what it desires, leaving behind only survivors. She looked down at Sailor, who was still weeping. I believed that if I made you strong enough, disciplined enough, perfect enough, you would never have to endure what I experienced. You would never be vulnerable. You would never be weak. Her voice faltered. But I overlooked that strength holds no value if there is nothing worth defending. David felt a tightening sensation in his chest. Lyra turned to him, and for the first time there was no trace of coldness in her eyes, only profound exhaustion. I do not possess the knowledge to be what they require, she admitted quietly. I only know how to embody what I was trained to be. David stepped forward. Then perhaps you will allow them to teach you. Lyra blinked. What? Allow them to teach you how to play, David suggested. Let them show you what it feels like to be happy once more. Because I suspect you have forgotten, Your Majesty. And I believe you have been merely surviving for so long that you have forgotten what it means to truly live. Lyra stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she looked down at the soccer ball lying on the grass. What is that? She inquired. It's a ball, David replied. We use it to play a game. What sort of game? David smiled. "The kind where you don't have to be perfect. You simply have to make an effort." Lyra gazed at the ball for a significant duration. Then, she looked at her daughters, who were observing her with wide, hopeful eyes, and she made a decision. She walked towards the ball, her crimson gown trailing behind her, and examined it as if it were an intricate puzzle she couldn't quite decipher. "How does one play?" she asked. Iris, the youngest, stepped forward. Her voice, though small, was courageous. "You kick it, Mama." Lyra looked at her daughter, then slowly, deliberately, she lifted one elegant foot and gently nudged the ball with her toe. It rolled approximately 3 inches. The girls gasped. David grinned. "Not bad for a first attempt." Lyra looked at him, then at the ball, then at her daughters, and then, for the first time in years, Empress Lyra smiled. It was a small, fragile, uncertain smile, but it was genuine. Shella let out a sob and rushed forward, wrapping her arms around her mother's waist. The other girls followed suit, all 5 of them clustering around Lyra, holding her, their tears mingling with laughter. And Lyra, the formidable, untouchable Empress Lyra, enfolded her daughters in her arms, holding them as if she had been anticipating this moment her entire life. David stepped back, granting them their space, his throat tight with emotion. After a considerable pause, Lyra looked up at him over her daughters' heads. "Thank you," she said softly. David nodded. "Any time, Your Majesty." Lyra drew back from her daughters and looked down at them. "I cannot promise that I will be adept at this. I cannot promise that I will always know the right course of action. But I can promise," her voice cracked, "I can promise that I will try." Chella smiled through her tears. "That is all we require, Mother." Lyra closed her eyes and drew them close once more, and somewhere within the palace, a rule that had stood for 9 years quietly shattered, replaced by something far more potent. Love. If you experienced an emotional connection witnessing these girls rediscover their childhood, please signify with a like so more individuals can encounter this narrative. And on a scale of 0 to 10, what rating would you assign to this profound moment? Share your thoughts in the comments section below. The days that followed were unlike anything the palace had ever witnessed. Empress Lyra did not instantly transform into a warm, playful, maternal figure. Centuries of Verdanian tradition and her own harrowing past were not so easily dispelled. However, she made an effort, and in her endeavor she unearthed a truth she had long forgotten, that vulnerability was not synonymous with weakness. She began joining her daughters in the courtyard each evening after her official duties were concluded. Initially, she merely observed, standing at the periphery as David guided them through new games. But gradually, tentatively, she began to participate. Her initial attempts to kick the soccer ball were clumsy, but her confidence grew with practice. She moved with awkwardness in her formal gown until Shella suggested a more practical attire. Her laughter, at first a muted sound, grew progressively louder until the resonance no longer felt alien in her throat. The palace staff were quick to notice the shift. Whispers circulated through the corridors. Some servants were delighted by the change. Others were aghast, the royal daughters behaving like common children, the Empress herself participating in their games. It was unprecedented, unthinkable. Yet no one dared voice their objections directly. No one, that is, except High Chancellor Vorik. Vorik was a tall, gaunt Verdanian male, his skin the deep hue of emerald, and his eyes missed nothing. He had served as the Empress's principal advisor for 15 years, and his career had been built entirely upon the preservation of tradition, order, and the stringent protocols that ensured the Empire's smooth operation. He observed the recent developments with mounting alarm. 3 weeks after the incident in the courtyard, he requested a private audience with the Empress. Lyra received him in her formal office, a vast chamber with walls of dark metal and windows offering a panoramic view of the capital city. She was seated behind her desk, still clad in the casual tunic she had worn while playing with her daughters an hour prior. The imperial crown rested on the desk beside her, temporarily set aside. Vorik noted this immediately, his jaw tightening imperceptibly. "Your Majesty," he stated, bowing formally. "Thank you for granting me this audience." "Of course, Vorik," Lyra replied. "What troubles you?" Vorik clasped his hands behind his back, his posture rigid. "Your Majesty, I must speak with utmost candor. The entire court is abuzz with discussions regarding your recent conduct." "My conduct?" Lyra's tone was neutral, but her eyes sharpened. "Your decision to permit the Imperial daughters to engage in recreational activities, and your own involvement in these pursuits. It has generated considerable inquiry." "What manner of inquiries?" Vorik hesitated, then pressed forward. "Questions regarding your suitability to govern." The ambient temperature in the room seemed to plummet by 10 degrees. Lyra rose slowly, her full stature and commanding presence dominating the space. "Elucidate your concerns now." Vorik did not flinch. He had navigated 15 years within the Imperial court by articulating difficult truths when necessary. "Your Majesty, you have consistently been a symbol of strength, discipline, and unwavering authority. The Empire holds you in high regard precisely because you are incorruptible, unemotional, absolute. However, these recent transformations, allowing your daughters to engage in childlike play, appearing in public without your crown, displaying overt affection." He paused, carefully choosing his next words. "It projects an image of weakness, and weakness in an empress invites challenges." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "From whom?" "From the outer colonies, from dissenting factions within the court, from any entity that perceives a ruler exhibiting leniency towards her offspring might also demonstrate leniency towards her adversaries." "I comprehend," Lyra said quietly. "And what course of action do you propose, Vorik?" "Revert to established protocols," he stated firmly. "Reinstate the daughters' formal educational curriculum. Cease these recreational activities. Dismiss the human caretaker who instigated this shift. Demonstrate to the Empire that you remain the steadfast individual you have always been." Lyra walked slowly to the window, her back to Vorik. Beyond the glass, the city stretched out in geometric perfection. Millions of lives meticulously ordered and controlled. "Do you realize what I have learned over these past 3 weeks, Vorik?" she inquired. "Your Majesty?" "I have learned that my daughters can recite the Treaty of Andros 7th in 4 distinct languages. They possess the ability to calculate orbital mechanics mentally. They can identify the ruling dynasties of 37 colony worlds." She turned to face him. "But until 3 weeks ago, not a single one of them knew how to laugh." Vorik remained silent. "I spent 9 years preparing them for survival," Lyra continued, her voice soft, yet imbued with intensity. 9 years endeavoring to make them perfect, disciplined, impervious. And in doing so, I created 5 spectral beings who moved through this palace as if they were already deceased. Your Majesty, I acknowledge the sentiment, but I must disagree, Lyra interjected sharply. You do not understand. You have no children, Vorik. You have never looked into the eyes of a child you cherish and seen utter emptiness within. No joy, no hope, only compliance. She moved towards him, her presence commanding. I am still the Empress. I continue to govern this empire with strength and authority. However, I will not sacrifice my daughter's spirits to uphold an image. If the court perceives my affection for my children as a deficiency, then it is imperative that the court re-examine its definition of true strength. Vorik's expression remained impassive, but a subtle edge entered his voice. Your Majesty, with all due respect, your perspective is perhaps too idealistic. Politics is devoid of sentiment. Power disregards happiness. The moment you exhibit vulnerability, an opportunity for exploitation will arise. Then let them attempt it, Lyra declared coldly, and they will discover that a mother defending her children poses a far greater threat than an empress safeguarding her throne. Vorik bowed stiffly. As you wish, Your Majesty, but do not say I failed to issue a warning. He turned to depart, but before he reached the door, Lyra spoke again. Vorik. He stopped, turning back. Lyra's eyes were as hard as steel. If you, or any other member of this court, attempts to undermine my authority or jeopardize my daughter's well-being, you will discover the full extent of my enduring strength. Am I understood? Vorik met her gaze for a prolonged moment. Then he bowed again, a deeper inclination this time. Crystal clear, Your Majesty. He departed. Lyra stood alone in her office, her hands trembling slightly. She had spoken her words with absolute conviction, yet Vorik's warning echoed in her mind. Weakness in an empress invites challenge. She looked down at the crown resting on her desk, that delicate circle of silver representing all she had striven for, all she had relinquished, and she pondered whether she could truly protect both her empire and her daughters, or if she would be compelled to make an agonizing choice. That evening, David was engaged in cleaning the corridor adjacent to the royal sleeping chambers when Chella found him. She stood in the doorway, dressed in her pink pajamas, her short green hair tousled from sleep, her expression clouded with concern. "Hello?" David said gently. "Can't sleep?" Chella shook her head. "I overheard Mother speaking with Chancellor Vorik earlier today." David's hands stilled on the cleaning cloth he had been using. "Yeah," he confirmed. "He said she's being weak. He said the court believes she's unfit to rule because she plays with us now." Chella's voice trembled. "He said it's our fault." David placed the cloth down and crouched before her, bringing himself to her eye level. "Chella, listen to me. None of this is your fault. Do you understand? Not even a little bit. But what if Mother loses her authority because of us?" "She won't," David stated with firm conviction. "Your mother is one of the most formidable individuals I have ever encountered. And do you know what makes her strong? It's not solely her intellect or her power. It's the fact that she is willing to adapt, to evolve, to acknowledge when something isn't functioning correctly, and to embrace a new approach." "But what if Chancellor Vorik is right?" Chella whispered. "What if love makes her weak?" David offered a sad smile. "Kid, I've witnessed a great deal in my life, and I can assure you of this. Love does not diminish strength. It cultivates bravery. Because when you love someone, you possess a compelling reason to fight. And that, my dear, is the most potent force in the universe." Chella looked at him, her eyes wide. "Do you truly believe that?" "I do," David affirmed. "I have a daughter, remember? Emma. And every single day I work in this palace, far away from her, because I love her, because I desire to provide her with a superior life. Love is not what renders us feeble, Chella. It is what empowers us to persevere when every other circumstance dictates surrender." Chella remained silent for a moment. Then she threw her arms around David's neck and held him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. David reciprocated the embrace. "Anytime, kid." Yet, even as he held her, a chilling sensation settled in his stomach, because he knew, with a certainty that unnerved him, that Chancellor Vorik was correct on one crucial point. Change invariably invites opposition, and opposition within a palace constructed on power could prove lethal. 2 days later, the crisis erupted. It commenced with a coded communication originating from the Outer Colonies, a faction of separatist leaders who had long harbored dissent against Verdanian rule. They had historically posed a minor annoyance, easily managed through diplomatic leverage and sporadic military displays. However, they now perceived a significant opportunity. News of the Empress's softening stance had disseminated beyond the palace confines, carried by servants and guards who engaged in overly candid discussions in public areas. The separatists seized upon this development, issuing a formal proclamation questioning Lyra's capacity to govern. They demanded a vote of confidence from the Galactic Council. Should Lyra lose that vote, she would be compelled to relinquish her position, and her children would fall under the Council's care until they reached maturity. This effectively meant they would be separated from her. When David received this intelligence, whispered urgently by a junior attendant in the hallways, a chill permeated his being. He discovered Lyra in her private chambers, standing by the window, her posture rigid. "Your Majesty," he conveyed softly from the threshold. "I am aware." Lyra did not face him. "Then you comprehend the gravity of the situation?" He responded with a quiet, "Yes." A prolonged silence ensued. Then, her voice drained of emotion, uttered, "Vorik was correct. I exhibited a lack of resolve, and they sensed weakness." David entered the room. "You demonstrated compassion. There is a distinction." "Not in the realm of politics," Lyra countered with bitterness. "In politics, compassion is a disadvantage. Vorik informed me I was inattentive. So what is your course of action?" Lyra turned to face him, and David perceived a look in her eyes that filled him with dread. Resignation. "I shall attend the council deliberation," she stated. "I will present my arguments, and should I be unsuccessful—" She faltered. "Should you fail?" David prompted. "If I fail, my daughters will be raised by strangers. They will be schooled in precisely what I strove to shield them from, and I will have fallen short of my duty to them." David's jaw clenched. "No, that will not transpire." Lyra offered a sorrowful smile. "You cannot avert it, David, nor can I. The vote has been officially called. All I can do is confront it." "Then permit me to assist you," David proposed. Lyra inclined her head. "You have already rendered assistance beyond measure. However, this conflict is now mine to navigate." "What if it does not have to be solely yours?" David inquired, an idea taking root in his mind. "What if there existed a means to illustrate to the Council, and indeed the entire galaxy, that your actions are not a sign of frailty? What if we could establish that affection and fortitude are not mutually exclusive?" Lyra regarded him. "How?" David's thoughts accelerated. Then, a resolute, almost fierce smile graced his lips. "By presenting them to your daughters." The Galactic Council Chamber was an expansive amphitheater suspended in neutral space, an edifice constructed by 17 allied civilizations to serve as the galaxy's foremost forum for diplomacy. Its translucent walls offered an unimpeded vista of the stars beyond, a perpetual reminder that the resolutions enacted within its confines bore consequence for countless star systems. Today, those seats were occupied. Representatives from 43 planetary territories had convened to observe the vote of confidence concerning Empress Lyra of Verdania Prime. The faction advocating for secession occupied one section, their countenances smug. The neutral delegates resided in another, their expressions deliberately impassive. Lyra's few remaining allies were dispersed throughout, their allegiance wavering. Chancellor Vorik sat beside Lyra in the accused section, his demeanor somber. He had advised against her personal attendance, suggesting it would be more prudent to dispatch a representative, to maintain a degree of detachment, and to sidestep potential humiliation should the vote prove unfavorable. However, Lyra had refused. If she was to champion the cause of her daughters, she would do so directly. The proceedings commenced with the formal pronouncements of accusation, delivered by the leader of the separatist bloc, a gray-skinned Thraxian named Divor. Empress Lyra has forsaken the established protocols that have guided Verdanian leadership for 3 centuries, Divor declared, his voice resonating throughout the chamber. She has permitted personal sentiment to undermine her judgment. She has displayed emotional instability. She has demonstrated that she prioritizes personal comfort over the responsibilities of governance. He paused, his gaze fixed upon Lyra. In essence, she has proven herself unfit to preside. A low murmur swept through the assembly. Lyra remained perfectly still, her expression unreadable, her hands clasped in her lap. She wore her diadem and her ceremonial crimson gown, embodying the very image of an empress. Yet, inwardly, her heart pounded. The council chair, an aged Quilarian with skin like polished silver, addressed the assembly next. "Empress Lyra, you are afforded the opportunity to respond to these allegations. How do you plead?" Lyra rose slowly. Every gaze in the chamber turned towards her. She drew a breath. "I do not dispute the accusations," she stated with clarity. "I have indeed undergone a transformation. I have permitted my daughters their playful diversions. I have engaged in activities deemed unsuitable for an empress. I have openly displayed affection. All of this is accurate." The murmurs intensified. Devore smirked, but Lyra was not yet concluded. "However," she continued, her voice cutting through the rising clamor, "I reject the assertion that these changes render me incapable of leadership. On the contrary, I contend they have made me more adept than ever before." A profound silence descended. "For 9 years," Lyra elaborated, "I governed through discipline and distance. I upheld tradition. I exhibited no faltering. I became precisely what the Empire anticipated I would be." She paused, her eyes sweeping across the chamber. "And in doing so, I became precisely what I had vowed I would never embody. I became my own adversary. I became the sort of leader who values appearance over truth, protocol over individuals, and power over purpose. She took a step forward. My daughters are brilliant. They are educated, articulate, and disciplined. But until recently, they were also empty. I had schooled them so rigorously in suppressing their emotions that I nearly extinguished their capacity to feel anything at all. Her voice gained strength. And then, a human custodian, a solitary father from a world we barely acknowledge, revealed something to me that I had long forgotten. He demonstrated that fortitude devoid of joy is merely a prolonged decline. That authority without affection is simply another guise of oppression. That preparing someone for survival is rendered meaningless if you strip them of all that makes survival worthwhile. She directed her gaze squarely at Devore. You claim I am weak because I cherish my children. I assert that cherishing them is the most courageous act I have ever undertaken, for love necessitates vulnerability. It demands the willingness to risk hurt, loss, and rejection, and I have spent my entire existence evading such risks. She turned to address the entire assembly, no longer focusing on any single individual. I remain the Empress of Verdania Prime. I still command starfleets, negotiate pacts, and render decisions that impact billions of lives. But I now undertake all of these responsibilities with something I previously lacked, a purpose extending beyond mere existence. My daughters are not merely inheritors of a throne. They are children who deserve the liberty to be children. And if this council perceives this as a disqualification for leadership, then perhaps this council ought to reassess the caliber of representatives it wishes to present to the galaxy. She resumed her seat. The chamber was enveloped in absolute quiet. Then, Devore rose, his earlier smile replaced by a look of cold calculation. Eloquent words, Your Majesty, yet they remain merely words. You speak of affection and strength as if they were compatible. But we have all witnessed the consequences when leaders allow sentiment to cloud judgment. Empires crumble, colonies revolt, systems collapse. He gestured towards the council. This is not a question of your affection for your offspring. It is about your capacity to safeguard them and the billions who depend on your leadership. And I submit that you are incapable. Then let us seek their testimony. Every head turned. David Cole stood at the entrance to the chamber, accompanied by Shella, Niara, Vin, Kayla, and little Iris. The 5 daughters of Empress Lyra, attired not in formal regalia, but in their simple pink sleepwear. Gasps echoed through the hall. Lyra's eyes widened. David, what are you doing? But David was already advancing, the girls following him with measured steps. They appeared small within that immense chamber, surrounded by delegates from numerous worlds, yet they walked with an air of dignity. David halted at the center of the floor and looked up at the council's presiding officer. Your Honor, I am merely a custodian. I hold no significant position, but I have spent the last 3 months observing these young ladies transform from spectral figures into vibrant, breathing children, and I believe perhaps the council should hear from them directly. This is highly irregular, the presiding officer stated, yet a note of curiosity laced his voice. Please, David implored, just 5 minutes. The officer glanced at Lyra, who sat frozen, her eyes moist. Then, he nodded. Proceed. David knelt before Sella. Tell them, he urged softly. Tell them what changed. Sella looked up at the assembled delegates, her small, verdant face pale but resolute. Then she spoke. 3 weeks ago, I had never experienced the sensation of laughter. I possessed knowledge of 17 languages, yet I did not understand how to play. I could recite interstellar treaties and calculate stellar trajectories, but I could not articulate what brought me joy, for I had never known joy. Her voice, though small, was clear. My mother believed she was protecting us. She thought that if we were flawless, we would be secure. But we were not secure. We were withering internally. We simply hadn't realized it yet. She turned to look at Lyra, and then she changed. She allowed us to be children. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to have a mother whose affection for me surpassed her devotion to her crown. Niara stepped forward next. Mother is not diminished now. She is strengthened because she is no longer fearful. The twins spoke in unison, their voices overlapping. She plays with us. She laughs with us. She embraces us. And little Iris, her voice a barely audible whisper, added, "She is a good mama." The chamber fell into complete silence. David rose. "These young ladies are being prepared to govern an empire one day. And I don't know about you, but I would rather be led by someone who comprehends joy, empathy, and love than by someone who solely understands power." He looked at Devore. "You wish to know if Empress Lyra can protect her children? Observe them. They stand before the entire galaxy defending her. That is not weakness. That is legacy." Devore opened his mouth to reply, but the council chair raised a hand. "The vote will proceed," the chair announced. "All delegates, please register your decision now." Lights began to illuminate across the chamber. Green for confidence, red for no confidence. Lyra held her breath. The lights flickered. Green, red, green, green, red. And then, overwhelmingly, green. The decision was not even contested. Empress Lyra had prevailed. 3 months after the council vote, the palace gardens were filled with joyous sounds. No longer confined to the private courtyard, but resounding through the public gardens, areas accessible to visiting dignitaries and citizens alike. Areas where tradition had always mandated perfect decorum. Now, they were alive with the sounds of children at play. Not merely Lyra's daughters, but children from across the colony worlds. A novel initiative Lyra had initiated, known as the Imperial Youth Exchange. Each month, children from various planets would visit the palace to learn, engage in recreation, and forge bonds that transcended political divisions. And at the heart of this vibrant scene, clad in comfortable tunics rather than formal attire, were Kella, Niara, Vin, Kayla, and Iris, instructing the other children in the art of playing soccer. Lyra observed from a balcony above, her crown resting on a nearby surface. Her expression softened. Beside her stood Chancellor Vorik, who had retained his position following a formal apology and a pledge of renewed allegiance. "I was mistaken," Vorik confessed quietly. "I asserted that demonstrating affection would render you vulnerable, but the entire galaxy witnessed the truth in that council chamber. They saw that your daughters would defend you with their lives. That caliber of loyalty cannot be demanded, it can only be earned." Lyra smiled. "I am still learning, Vorik. Every day presents its challenges. At times, I err on the side of severity. At others, I am too lenient. But I am making an effort which is more than I allowed myself previously. The Empire is stronger for it," Vorik affirmed. "The colonial insurrections have diminished by 40% since the Council's verdict. Trade agreements that had been stalled for years have been finalized. And this is all due to the fact that the galaxy observed something in that chamber that had never been witnessed before. An empress who was also a mother." Lyra nodded slowly. "Sovereignty alone cannot sustain an empire indefinitely. Eventually, individuals require something to believe in beyond mere might. They require hope. They need to see that their leaders are capable of adaptation, of growth, of humanity." She gazed down at her daughters. "I nearly jeopardized the most cherished aspects of my life out of apprehension, fearing that excessive affection might lead to their loss. But I discovered the inverse to be true. The greater your love, the more you stand to lose. But conversely, the more you possess that is worth defending." Down in the garden, David was assisting Iris in retrieving a sphere that had rolled into a fountain. The young girl was laughing, her verdant hair damp, her face alight with pure joy. A wave of profound gratitude washed over Lyra. David had been extended an offer for a formal role as the Imperial family's cultural liaison, a position accompanied by a substantial remuneration, accommodation within the palace, and the requisite resources to facilitate his daughter Emma's relocation to Verdania Prime to reside with him. He had accepted, and when Emma arrived 2 weeks prior, a small human child with dark hair and luminous eyes, she and the 5 alien princesses had formed an immediate camaraderie. Now all 6 children played together, their laughter no longer an unfamiliar sound within the palace confines. "Your Majesty," Vorik announced, "the delegation from the Andros system has arrived for your afternoon consultation." Lyra sighed. "Indeed, duty calls." But before she turned to depart, she called down to the garden. "Chella, I shall join you in approximately an hour." Chella looked up, her face breaking into a broad smile. "Promise, promise," Lyra called back, her words entirely sincere. That evening, as the twin suns descended below the horizon of Verdania Prime, Lyra sat in the courtyard with her daughters. They were all in their sleepwear now, weary from a day of spirited play. David had taken Emma to their new quarters to prepare her for rest. The girls were reclined on the emerald turf, gazing upwards at the constellations. "Mother," Iris murmured sleepily. "Tell us a story." Lyra smiled. "What sort of story?" "A true one," Sela requested. "Tell us about your youth." Lyra remained quiet for a moment. She had spent years evading her own past, burying her pain and fear beneath layers of discipline and control. But these were her daughters, and they were entitled to the unvarnished truth. "When I was very young," Lyra began, "younger than you are now, Sela, my mother was taken from me, and I learned a lesson that I believed would ensure my perpetual safety. I learned that excessive sentiment was perilous, that affection rendered one vulnerable, and that the sole method of survival was to become impervious." She looked down at their upturned faces. "I was mistaken," she said softly. "Love does indeed make you vulnerable, but vulnerability is not synonymous with weakness. Vulnerability signifies that you possess the courage to care about something beyond your own continued existence. And that form of bravery," she continued, "is what fundamentally alters the world." Niara reached out and gently clasped her mother's hand. Lyra squeezed it reassuringly. "I dedicated most of my life to constructing barriers," she continued. "Barriers around my heart, around my emotions, around anything that might inflict pain. And those barriers preserved me, but they also isolated me. It required a human custodian and 5 courageous daughters to illuminate for me that fortifications are not equivalent to fortitude, that occasionally the most valiant course of action is to dismantle them. We love you, Mother," Vin expressed. "Even when you are stern," Kayla added. Lyra laughed, tears welling in her eyes. "And I love you, every one of you, more than I ever conceived possible." They sat together in comfortable silence, observing the gradual emergence of the stars, one by one. And in that moment, Empress Lyra grasped a fundamental truth that no amount of academic study or worldly experience had ever imparted to her. Power was significant, leadership was vital, duty was paramount. But love, that untidy, vulnerable, and often terrifying emotion, was what imbued all of it with meaning. Years later, when Chella ascended to the throne as the new Empress of Verdania Prime, she would implement profound reforms across the Empire. Educational systems that integrated play alongside rigorous study, leadership training that fostered empathy alongside strategic acumen, and cultural programs that celebrated joy in conjunction with achievement. And she would inform anyone who inquired that she had acquired all the necessary knowledge, not from treaties, star charts, or diplomatic protocols. She had learned it from 3 hours spent in a courtyard with a soccer ball and a human custodian who understood that children needed to be allowed to be children. The Empire would flourish under her governance, becoming more unified, more compassionate, and more receptive to change, because she comprehended what her mother had finally come to understand. In a universe that perpetually demanded flawlessness, sometimes the most revolutionary act was simply to embrace one's humanity, or in their specific case, to embody their beautifully, wonderfully imperfect selves.